If you've just picked up a Sony camera and you've been watching YouTube videos, then you've probably noticed that a lot of creators note that they shoot in SLOG. And now you're here because your next question was, well, what is SLOG? In this video, I'm gonna tell you everything that you need to know about SLOG to get you up and running as quickly as possible, including what SLOG is, why you would wanna shoot in SLOG, camera settings and properly exposing for SLOG, color correcting and color grading SLOG, as well as when you wouldn't wanna shoot in SLOG. If you're shooting in a log profile that isn't with a Sony camera like Canon or Nikon, then this will still be valid as the principles remain the same. Let's get into it. Simply put, log is a picture profile or a color profile that you can apply to your footage in camera that results in a really flat, desaturated look. You might say, well, that looks terrible. Why would I want to shoot in log? Well, shooting in this flat picture profile retains a lot more color information than in a standard picture profile, which means that you have a lot more flexibility when it comes to color correction and color grading than you would with a standard picture profile. It's kind of like shooting raw images if you're coming from a photography background. Yes, you have more work to actually make the image usable and presentable, but as a result of that, you get more flexibility and freedom in the post-processing. Getting your camera into a log profile is going to be different for every camera, so you're gonna have to look up how to do it for your specific camera. For the latest Sony cameras with the updated menu system, you'll wanna make sure that you're in video mode on your camera, and then head over here and under picture profile, change this to PP8. Now you'll see that I'm in SLOG3 and my color mode is sgamut.cine. If you're shooting with a Sony camera that shoots in 10-bit color, like the a7 IV that I'm shooting on, or the a7S III, or the many other Sony cameras that shoot in 10-bit color, then these are the settings that you're going to use. If you're shooting with a Sony camera that only shoots in 8-bit color, then you're gonna wanna change your gamma type to SLOG2 and your color mode to be sgamut. One thing that you can do to speed up your video workflow is to save this as your custom modes 1 and 2 for video mode. Right now I have my 1 set to 24 frames per second in SLOG3, and I have my 2 set to 60 frames per second in SLOG3. That way I can quickly switch between photo and video mode and just switch over to one of my presets and just start shooting video. The only other thing to touch on when it comes to camera settings are base ISOs. Your camera's base ISO is the ISO which has the least signal to noise ratio, or more simply put, the ISO that is going to result in the least amount of noise in your image. Depending on the camera and the picture profile that you're shooting in, this is going to be different. Some cameras have one base ISO, and other cameras, like the camera that I'm shooting on, have multiple. Really what this means is that you need to Google what the base ISO or ISOs are for the camera that you're shooting on, and to make sure that you're always shooting in one of these ISOs. Now that we've talked about camera settings, let's talk about how you properly expose your footage to get the best results when you're shooting in SLOG. Now, I'm not gonna get into the nitty-gritty technical details. I'm gonna give you guys a practical, efficient way to get the correct exposure in your footage. And in Sony cameras, this is using something called Gamma Display Assist. When you're shooting in log, it's difficult to gauge the exposure just by looking at the monitor on the back of your camera because it's in such a flat, desaturated profile. If you go into your camera menu and turn on Gamma Display Assist, which I've mapped to this button on my camera, you're now able to see pretty accurately what your image is going to look like when it's been corrected. Just note that turning on Gamma Display Assist does nothing to the actual footage that gets recorded on your camera. This is just for you to accurately be able to see on your monitor what the footage is going to look like. You're still going to be recording in that flat, desaturated log profile. I found that if I expose to what I see on the back of my screen, it's pretty accurate, but a little bit underexposed. So what I like to do is bump it up by about 1/4 to 1/2 stop, and that usually does the job. This is gonna take some trial and error with your specific camera and picture profile combo, but I found that this is what works best for this specific camera. Now that you've captured your footage in log, you're gonna need to convert it into something that looks normal. There are a number of ways to do this, and I'm gonna show you a few of them now. The easiest way by far is if you're using DaVinci Resolve as your editor, which I would highly recommend you use as it's free and the color grading tools in Resolve are unmatched by other editors. If you aren't using Resolve, skip ahead to one of the other methods which will work on any other editor. In Resolve, go into the color page. For simplicity of this video, I'm just gonna add one more node so that you have two serial nodes. Go to the effects and search for color space transform and drag that onto the second node. And you wanna be sure that you add it to the second node, not the first, and I'll explain why in a minute. This color space transform effect will transform your log footage into Rec 709, which is the standard color space for viewing. Now go into the input color space and change this to whatever color space you shot in. For me, it was SLOG 3 and sgamut3.cine. And now for output, set the color space to Rec 709 and Gamma 2.2. And you'll see that my footage is now converted to a more normal looking image. Now, why we added another node is because I do like to go in and make tweaks to the image to fix the exposure and white balance to my liking. And that's why I said to make sure that you add the color space transform to the second of the two nodes. We want to make color corrections to the image, but we want to do it before it gets transferred into Rec 709. So what I'll do with this footage is a quick white balance adjustment, and then using the waveform graph, I'll just make sure to expose my image where I want it to be. So I'm just going to play with the lift, gamma, and gain to get the image looking how I want. And that's pretty good to me. This next technique I want to illustrate is how you would convert your log footage manually without the use of any LUT, effect, or plugin. This is something that I think everyone should know how to do, and it's super easy to learn and can be used with any editor. So in order to manually correct your log footage, what you're going to want to use is the waveform graph. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the lift or the shadows until the bottom part of the graph is just above 0. Next up, I'm going to raise up my gain or the highlights until the skin tone sits somewhere in the 640 to 768 range, and I find that that looks pretty good. Lastly, what I'll do is I'll just adjust the gamma to make the image look how I want it to look. I'm also gonna bump the saturation up to bring some color back into the image. I'm also gonna go and do a white balance adjustment on a different node. I think I need to drop the shadows a little more, and I think we're pretty much there. This is a good starting point, and you could take the color grade further from here. Next up is another method to convert your log footage that will work on any editor, but depending on what camera and what editor you're using, the steps will be slightly different. And that is to use a conversion LUT. Now, you can use a LUT from your camera manufacturer's website, or you can use another LUT that another creator has made, like these LUTs from Matti Haapoja that are actually quite good. So go find your LUT by either Googling your camera and then downloading it from their website, or download it from your creator. Next up, you want to make sure that it's in the correct folder on your computer so that it shows up as a LUT you can use in your editor. Now again, depending on what operating system you're working on and what editor you're using, the place that you put this is going to be different, so just Google it. For DaVinci Resolve on a Mac, it gets stored here. Once the LUT is in this folder, I'll open up Resolve and I'll go into the color page. Again, I'll add another node and then go into my LUTs, find the Sony one I just added, and drag it onto my second node. As I did with the first method, I'll go to the first node and clean up the image by fixing the white balance and the exposure until I am happy with the image. There's one more method that I frequently use to correct and degrade my footage, and that's with a plugin. There are a bunch of different plugins out there, but the one that I'm currently using isn't a conversion plugin specifically. It's actually a film emulation plugin called Dehancer. I've made a video on it in the past, which I'll link in the description, but essentially it gives you the ability to choose between a whole bunch of different film stocks and print mediums to get really cool film looks for your videos. To convert my footage, I'll simply drag the plugin on my video. I'll deactivate all of the film looks and the grain so you can see the conversion in action. I'll select my camera type and the setting I shot in, and it converts it for you. Now I can go ahead and fix the exposure, apply a film look, add halation, bloom, compression, and very quickly get a really unique look. Now, this video or my previous video on Dehancer weren't sponsored, but if you are interested in checking them out, I do have a link down in the description below that gives you 10% off any of their products. All right, so now that we've covered everything from camera settings to how to expose to converting your footage, let's talk about when you wouldn't want to shoot in a log profile. Really, when it comes down to it, it comes down to the amount of time that you have on a specific project. If you're on a tight deadline and you don't think that you have the time to do any color grading, then don't shoot in a log profile. For me personally, I shoot all of my videos in a log profile, and that's for two reasons. The first, because I don't really have a hard deadline on any of these videos, and the second is because I actually enjoy color grading. But I know that that's not the case with everyone, and a lot of people are totally okay with the standard picture profile that comes with your camera, and that's fine too. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please consider subscribing. It helps to get this video out to more people that can benefit from it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.